Get out of my class. The flight instructor's voice echoed through the hangar as he tore Mackenzie Taylor's training manual from her hands. Coffee splashed over her white blouse as he deliberately knocked over her mug. The F-47 Thunderbolt is the most advanced fighter jet in our fleet, not for kitchen warriors like you. Laughter erupted among the male trainees. Someone pulled out their phone and began filming her humiliation. Stick to kitchen appliances, sweetheart, another called out. The instructor tossed her application into the trash. Women lack the spatial awareness and mental toughness for combat flying. That's scientifically proven. As security escorted her out, Mackenzie's fingers brushed over the worn pilot wings in her jacket pocket, her grandfather's legacy. But instead of crying, her eyes narrowed with determination. She said nothing, yet her faint smile unsettled the instructor. They had humiliated the wrong woman. Mackenzie M. Taylor was never one to back down from a challenge. At 32, she lived in a modest apartment in San Diego, California, overlooking the nearby naval base. Each morning, she watched planes streak across the sky over a cup of coffee, imagining herself in the cockpit. A former U.S. Air Force engineer with a mechanical engineering degree from MIT, Mackenzie came from a proud, fourth-generation military family. Her grandfather was a decorated fighter pilot who flew dangerous missions over enemy territory. Her father served as a helicopter pilot in the Gulf War. Both instilled in her a respect for aviation and a desire to follow in their footsteps. After her honorable discharge from the Air Force, Mackenzie worked as a civilian engineer at North Star Aerospace, developing flight control systems for the next generation of aircraft. The pay was good, and her colleagues respected her skills, but her dream remained unfulfilled: to fly the machines she helped design. For 3 years, she applied to the exclusive Peterson Advanced Flight Academy in San Diego, the only civilian institution authorized to train pilots on the F-47 Thunderbolt, a cutting-edge fighter jet with unique civilian applications. The academy, led by retired Air Force Colonel James Peterson, maintained close ties with military and civilian aerospace companies. Graduates secured top positions at major airlines and defense firms. Positions Mackenzie knew she deserved as, much as any man, each rejection stung. But she never showed it. Instead, she saved every penny of her salary to cover the $85,000 tuition. Her weekends were spent not partying or dating, but logging over 500 flight hours at small airfields across California. After being rejected twice using her full name, she finally applied as M. Taylor, letting her qualifications speak for themselves. What the Academy didn't know, and only her former supervisor was aware of, was that Mackenzie had worked directly on the F-47's flight control systems during her Air Force tenure. She knew the aircraft better than many of the instructors. Her grandfather's pilot wings, handed to her with trembling fingers on his deathbed, were more than a keepsake. They were a promise. "You'll fly higher than I ever did, Mac," he said. Those worn wings, carried close to her heart, gave her strength and courage before every challenge. That morning, Mackenzie had walked into the Peterson Academy brimming with confidence, convinced her achievements would speak for themselves. Instead, she now stood in the parking lot, coffee staining her blouse, security at her side, and the men's mocking laughter ringing in her ears. But Mackenzie Taylor didn't quit. Not today, not ever. Ryan Henderson, a former Air Force colleague, pretended not to recognize her when she returned to the academy the next day, proper paperwork in hand. Her admission couldn't be legally revoked. "Mac, oh wow, I thought you were applying as an administrative assistant," he said loudly as she entered the briefing room, prompting snickers from the other instructors. Ryan, who had failed flight training years ago and settled for a ground instructor role, seemed to have turned his personal failure into resentment, especially toward those he deemed unworthy of succeeding where he hadn't, particularly women. Later that week at the Afterburner bar, where pilots gathered to share stories and camaraderie, Ryan introduced Mackenzie with a smug grin. "This is her. She thinks she'll fly the F-47. The group roared with laughter, beer sloshing over glasses. "Sweetheart, the only thing you'll fly is economy class home when you fail." said a man whose jacket bore badges Mackenzie knew he hadn't earned. She sipped her water quietly, memorizing every face. One day, these same men would watch her, soar past them, literally and figuratively. Even in her apartment complex, she couldn't escape the constant doubt. Her neighbor, Bill Thornton, a United Airlines pilot, regularly undermined her confidence in the elevator or at the mailbox. You know, the simulator costs more than you'll earn in 10 years. They'll never let you near it, he said while sorting his mail. When Mackenzie mentioned her experience designing such systems, Bill smirked condescendingly. Designing something and flying it are two different things. That's why men are pilots and women are flight attendants. It's just natural aptitude. No offense. His words always sounded like friendly, neighborly advice, but were steeped in prejudice. The rejection wasn't limited to the aviation world. At the supermarket, Mackenzie proudly wore her Peterson Academy jacket, which had cost a small fortune, and symbolized her hard-earned place in the program. A little girl, about 7 or 8, pointed excitedly. "Look, Mommy! She's a pilot!" The mother pulled her child away, casting Mackenzie a disapproving glance. "That's not for girls like us, honey. Let's find something that suits us better." Those words hit Mackenzie harder than the taunts of her male peers. This was how the cycle perpetuated. Dreams crushed before they could take root. The first week of ground training made it clear what she was up against. On Monday, she arrived early to find her desk smeared with lipstick, adorned with household items, a whisk, a wooden spoon, and a kitchen timer, placed where her textbooks should have been. While others received complete course materials, Mackenzie got outdated manuals with missing pages. When she reported it to the administrative office, the secretary gave her a pitying look. "Maybe check the women's restroom. I heard some guys thought it was funny to hide them there." Brad Wilson, a former Navy pilot with half as many flight hours as Mackenzie and none of her technical expertise, was immediately named team leader of their 5-person study group, while Mackenzie was relegated to taking notes. "Nothing personal, Taylor," said instructor Scott Daniels with a thin smile. "Wilson has the natural leadership qualities our program demands." Brad's leadership mostly involved dismissing Mackenzie's technical contributions and assigning her the least desirable tasks. When simulator training began in the second week, the discrimination became even more blatant. Instructor Daniels deliberately set Mackenzie's simulator to the highest difficulty: severe weather, system failures, and unpredictable air traffic, while the male trainees used standard settings. The others watched, expecting her to fail. Spectacularly, but Mackenzie's engineering background allowed her to analyze each system failure and tackle the challenges with methodical precision. She outperformed most of her male peers despite the rigged conditions. Daniels, however, commented to the class, "Taylor just got lucky. Probably a computer glitch. We'll redo her evaluation tomorrow." During emergency training, trainees were supposed to pair up for cockpit crisis scenarios. The male trainees pointedly excluded Mackenzie. "If I pass out in a real emergency, I'd rather crash than be saved by a woman," joked Travis Baker, a muscular ex-military pilot from Texas. "Her hands are too small to reach the emergency controls anyway." When Mackenzie pointed out to instructor Captain Reed that she couldn't complete the exercises alone, he shrugged. "Pick your own partners. This isn't kindergarten." Left with no choice, she practiced with a maintenance dummy, mockingly called her perfect boyfriend by the others. Silent and immobile. By the third week, the hostility had escalated from childish pranks to targeted sabotage. Colonel Peterson summoned Mackenzie to his wood-paneled office overlooking the tarmac, walls lined with photos of him alongside aviation pioneers. All men. "You're disrupting the group's cohesion," he said coldly, offering her no seat as he stood behind his desk. "Your presence distracts my best students. Perhaps you should consider switching to the passenger flight program. Less demanding. Better suited for someone with your..." He trailed off, his gaze sliding dismissively over her. When Mackenzie scored a perfect 100 on the aerodynamics exam, while the class average was 76.5, Instructor Captain Reed publicly accused her of cheating. No one gets a perfect score on their first try, especially not... He didn't finish, but his implication was clear. Without evidence or investigation, her grade was lowered to 75. When she calmly protested, citing her detailed answers, Reed cut her off. Be glad you're not expelled. Take the passing grade and move on. During the midsummer interim evaluation, where trainees presented their progress to a panel, only Mackenzie was questioned about her physical and psychological fitness. The F-47 generates forces the female body can't withstand, declared Dr. Winters, the Academy's medical advisor, who had never reviewed her impeccable health records. Are you prepared to deal with the impact on your reproductive system? Many women experience cycle disruptions or fertility issues under G-forces. No male trainee was asked about their bodily functions or family plans. Mackenzie remained composed, answering each inappropriate question with factual precision, refusing to give the emotional reaction they likely hoped to provoke. The harassment didn't stop at the Academy's walls. Aviation Insider, a widely read industry blog, published an article titled "Quota Rules in the Cockpit: Standards Lowered at Elite Flight Academy." Though not named, a blurry photo of Mackenzie appeared in the background, and anonymous sources claimed traditional standards were being sacrificed for gender agendas. The comment sections overflowed with vitriol, many demanding a return to the days when men flew and women served drinks. Worse was a viral video showing Mackenzie during a particularly grueling simulation exercise programmed with multiple catastrophic malfunctions. She briefly lost control of the virtual aircraft before expertly recovering, but someone edited the clip to show only her struggle, cutting out her successful recovery and the identical struggles of male trainees in the same scenario. Titled, "Why Women Shouldn't Fly." The video garnered thousands of comments, most agreeing, "Would you feel safe with her flying your plane?" Mackenzie's mother called her in tears after seeing it, asking if she might consider a different career. "I just don't want you to suffer, honey," she said, voicing doubts Mackenzie refused to let herself entertain. The Peterson Academy's Alumni Association, an influential network of aviation industry leaders, issued a statement expressing concern about maintaining the rigorous standards that made the program the nation's best. Several prominent graduates, now executives at major airlines and defense firms, threatened to withdraw financial support if a supposed politically correct admissions policy further jeopardized the Academy's reputation. Though Mackenzie wasn't named, everyone knew she was the only non-traditional trainee. The message was clear. Her presence threatened the Academy's prestige and financial future. In the 8th week of the 12-week program, institutional barriers became even more overt. The FAA sent a special examiner after an anonymous safety complaint. No other trainee was scrutinized so closely. The examiner, a former military pilot in his 60s, took copious notes on Mackenzie's every minor error, his loud scribbling sounding like a prelude to an indictment. Simultaneously, the Academy's finance department suddenly claimed an issue with Mackenzie's tuition, a $5,000 shortfall she couldn't easily cover. She was given 48 hours to pay, coincidentally just before the critical Phase 2 evaluations. Other trainees never faced such issues. Mackenzie had to take out an expensive emergency loan, adding to her already immense mental strain. Worst of all, the Academy Board introduced new physical requirements mid-program, tailored to exploit differences between men and women. Minimum height and reach standards were set, values many women, including Mackenzie, barely met. Upper body strength tests, largely irrelevant to actual flying demands, were also added. "Safety is our top priority," Colonel Peterson declared. These standards ensure all graduates meet the physical demands of modern aircraft. That Mackenzie had already proven herself in the simulator was ignored. Despite it all, Mackenzie didn't give up. She studied longer, trained harder, and maintained a professional demeanor to give her detractors no further ammunition. At night, alone in her apartment, she sometimes held her grandfather's wings and whispered, "I won't quit, not after all this." The metal, polished smooth from decades of wear, first by her grandfather in combat, then by her father, now by her, connected her to her family's legacy of courage. Some mornings, exhausted from late-night studying, she wondered if the constant fight was worth it. But then she forced herself to watch the jets take off from the naval base, their afterburners igniting a promise of freedom that renewed her resolve. The final exam loomed, a real flight test in the F-47 Thunderbolt. Only the top 3 trainees would get the chance to fly, and the best would earn a prestigious position with the aircraft manufacturer. Despite her superior academic performance and the cheating accusation reluctantly dropped, Mackenzie ranked AO, 4th just below the cutoff. Brad Wilson, Travis Baker, and Ryan's protege, Michael Connors, were the only ones allowed to fly the cutting-edge jet they'd studied for 3 months. Mackenzie's dream seemed to shatter, even though she'd outperformed Michael in every written exam and simulator test. The night before the test flights, Mackenzie worked late in the simulator room, trying to understand what she could have done differently. The academy was nearly empty, most students and staff already home or celebrating the program's end. Through the ajar door of the adjacent briefing room, she overheard a tense conversation between Colonel Peterson and Captain Reed about a critical stabilization flaw in the F-47. The exact issue she'd identified and solved as an Air Force engineer. "The manufacturer says it's within acceptable limits, but I'm not convinced," Peterson said, his voice unusually worried. "If they engage thrust vectoring above 32,000 feet during high-angle maneuvers, the fly-by-wire system could become unstable." "Should we cancel the flights?" Reed asked. No, Peterson replied. "The test route doesn't require those conditions. As long as they stick to the flight plan, there's no risk. No one but us and the engineers knows about this. The test? Pilots just need to avoid thrust vectoring above 32,000 feet. Mackenzie froze. She remembered Brad Wilson's boastful words earlier that day. "Tomorrow, I'll show everyone what this jet can really do. I've got some surprises planned that'll make the manufacturer's test pilots look like amateurs." He'd specifically mentioned high-speed maneuvers at high altitude, exactly what was dangerous. She opened the door decisively, startling both men. "You can't let them fly without warning," she said firmly. "The stabilization issue is too risky." Peterson's face darkened. "You were eavesdropping, Taylor. That's grounds for dismissal." "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was in the simulator room, and you were loudly discussing a safety issue that could kill one of your students." Mackenzie didn't back down. "I worked on the F-47's flight controls when I was in the Air Force. The stability issue isn't with the component itself, but its integration with the fly-by-wire system. I developed a solution 3 years ago, but it was ignored because it came from a young engineer. A female engineer." She paused, locking eyes with Peterson. "Your 3 best students will fly tomorrow without that fix." Brad Wilson struggled with high-altitude maneuvers in the simulator, and plans to use the exact thrust vectoring that could trigger the flaw. Do you really want to risk his life just to save your pride? Peterson and Reed exchanged worried glances. Brad Wilson was the son of a senator on the Defense Committee, a connection the Academy carefully nurtured. If anything happened to him, the consequences would be severe. "Your test pilots could die tomorrow if you don't let me fly," Mackenzie said resolutely. "I know the F-47 systems better than anyone here. I can demonstrate the issue and the fix in a controlled flight. Or you can hope Brad doesn't get ambitious and put on a show for the visiting executives." After intense deliberation behind closed doors, Peterson reluctantly agreed to let Mackenzie fly, not as a trainee, but as a technical safety consultant. "You go up last, after the others complete their flights," he said hesitantly. "This isn't part of the competition, just a precaution." Mackenzie knew this was her only shot, and accepted, without protest. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she reviewed every technical document on the F-47 she could find, refreshing her knowledge of the exact conditions that triggered the stabilizer issue and the precise control inputs needed to correct it. By dawn, she was exhausted but ready, both for her own flight and, if necessary, to save one of her tormentors from disaster. The test day began clear, with perfect flying conditions, unlimited visibility, and calm winds. Manufacturer executives arrived in sleek corporate jets, accompanied by military observers and aviation journalists. The tension was palpable as the gleaming F-47 Thunderbolt was towed onto the tarmac, its cutting-edge design eliciting gasps from the crowd. Mackenzie stood apart, ignored by her peers, who congratulated the 3 chosen pilots. Travis Baker flew first, delivering a solid but cautious flight that demonstrated basic handling without taking risks. He landed to polite applause, having completed the prescribed test route without incident. Michael Connors followed with a slightly bolder performance, attempting an advanced maneuver that succeeded but wasn't particularly graceful. Then came Brad's turn. His arrogance was palpable as he climbed into the cockpit with a theatrical salute. He began with unauthorized low-altitude passes over the airfield, drawing gasps from the crowd, while the manufacturer's test pilots noted the unnecessary risks. Growing bolder, Brad announced over the radio his intent to demonstrate the F-47's full combat capabilities, deviating from the approved flight plan. He climbed rapidly to altitudes where the stabilizer flaw could turn deadly. Mackenzie watched the telemetry on the ground, her stomach tightening as Brad reached 30,000 feet. "He's going to attempt a high-angle thrust vector flight," she warned Colonel Peterson, who was visibly nervous. At 32,500 feet, exactly as she'd predicted, Brad initiated the maneuver. On the live video feed from the chase plane, everyone saw the F-47 begin to wobble unnaturally. Its normally stable flight path was disrupted by the conflict between the fly-by-wire system and the stabilizers. The jet went out of control, spinning. Brad's panicked voice came over the radio. "Control! I've got a system failure! Help!" Without waiting for permission, Mackenzie grabbed the radio. "Brad, this is Mackenzie Taylor. Switch to manual control and reduce thrust to 40%. Left rudder to counter, not right. The flight computer's giving you bad corrections." A tense moment of silence followed, then Brad's strained voice. "Manual control engaged, thrust at 40, left rudder set." Slowly, agonizingly, the F-47 stabilized, though it was far from normal. With Mackenzie's calm, precise instructions, Brad regained enough control to attempt a landing. The approach was shaky, but he touched down safely. The jet was damaged, but the pilot was unharmed. As emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, the crowd stood in stunned silence, having witnessed the near disaster firsthand. Colonel Peterson turned to Mackenzie, his face pale. "Get in the backup jet. Show us how it's supposed to be done." As Mackenzie climbed into the second F-47's cockpit, she felt an odd calm. This was where she belonged, not fighting for acceptance, but flying. The complex instrument panel, intimidating to many pilots, was familiar territory to her. Every switch and display reminded her of her engineering days. With practiced precision, she completed the pre-flight checklist and requested clearance. "Thunderbolt 2, you're cleared." "For takeoff. Standard test route, Taylor. No deviations," came the response. Mackenzie replied, "Understood, Control." Knowing she'd fly far more than the standard route, as the powerful engines roared, she felt her grandfather's wings pressing against her chest through her flight suit. Mackenzie flew the F-47 cautiously, at first demonstrating flawless control at low altitude. She wanted everyone to see she mastered the basics before attempting advanced maneuvers. The jet responded precisely to her inputs, and the observers on the ground watched a smooth, issue-free flight. Then she climbed higher. "Control, I'm going to demonstrate the stabilizer issue and how to fix it," she said. Peterson tried to intervene, but she was already at 32,000 feet, where Brad had lost control. "Taylor, return immediately," he called, alarmed. But Mackenzie responded, "I've got this under control. The team needs to see this." She deliberately triggered the stabilizer issue, and the jet began to wobble, just as it had for Brad. But Mackenzie stayed calm, applying the corrections she'd developed as an engineer. The instability vanished quickly, and she continued flying. With full confidence, executing maneuvers no one had dared attempt with this jet. For 15 minutes, she showcased her mastery, leaving the crowd in awe. Her landing was so smooth, it felt like the jet was floating. On the ground, the chief engineer approached her. "That was the best handling I've ever seen. How did you know about the stabilizer issue? Our top people are still working on it." Before Mackenzie could respond, the development director asked, "How did you fix it in flight? Our pilots struggle with that." Mackenzie explained, "I'm the engineer who proposed the adaptive stabilization algorithm 3 years ago. The issue was documented, but my name was overlooked." The crowd was stunned by her combination of technical knowledge and flying skill. Brad, now medically cleared and visibly shaken, approached her. "You saved my life," he said. "I don't know how to thank you." "Remember that the next time you judge someone based on their gender," Mackenzie replied. "Flying takes skill, not prejudice." At the graduation ceremony, Brad publicly thanked her. "Without Mackenzie, I wouldn't be standing here today," he admitted. The Academy established a scholarship for female pilots named after Mackenzie's grandfather. An FAA examiner offered her a consulting role to improve flight regulations. And the aircraft manufacturer hired her as a test pilot and engineer with double her previous salary. At the ceremony, Mackenzie received her grandfather's wings back as a symbol of recognition. She continued advocating for fair training without discrimination, supporting affected students. She refused to have her worst critics expelled. "They should learn from their mistakes," she said. Her story spread rapidly. Newspapers praised her courage, and she became a role model for equality. 6 months later, Mackenzie led the first all-female test flight of the improved F-47. Young girls in the stands watched in awe, dreaming of their own futures as pilots. Colonel Peterson observed with respect as Mackenzie led her team, proving women could fly just as well. The same executives who once dismissed her algorithm now proudly cited her work. That afternoon, Mackenzie pinned honorary pilot wings on a young girl in the Academy program, reflecting on her journey. "The sky doesn't care about gender," she said. "It only respects skill, knowledge, and courage, even in the face of those who say you don't belong." She touched her grandfather's wings on her flight suit, symbols of obstacles overcome. True strength, she knew, wasn't in tearing others down, but in surmounting challenges and uplifting others. As the sun set, Mackenzie looked to a future full of possibilities. The path she'd forged would help others, just as her grandfather and father had helped her. Some battles, she realized, were won not with anger, but with undeniable excellence.